Hello, everyone, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome Dr. Jenny Fox Eades today. And Jenny is both a priest and an Alexander Technique teacher, and she has long and broad experience in education and well-being and spirituality. And she's got a book coming out quite soon, and she's going to tell us something about how she has been able to convert something of her personal journey of discovery, her own personal inquiries, into her book, her written account. And so thank you very much, Jenny, for agreeing to speak to us today.
Pleasure.
And so it might be useful if you could just say something about what the book is about.
I mean, it's called Embodying Prayer, exploring Franciscan spirituality with the Alexander Technique. And it does what it says on the tin, really. As well as being a priest, I'm a third order Franciscan. I can say more about that in a bit, as well as an Alexander teacher. And I was asked to write about both things. And I said, well, there are far more expert Franciscans and far more expert Alexander teachers than me, but possibly there aren't many of us who feel that crossover. So having been set the challenge, I agreed. And then lockdown happened. So it became my lockdown project.
Okay. So you mentioned about your order. Could you say a few sentences about that and why it appealed to you enough to become ordained?
Well, you're not ordained into the third order. I'm ordained as a priest in the Church of England. You join the third order. So the third order is a religious order. There are first and second orders, as you'd expect. The first order are monks and nuns or sisters who both work and pray. The whole sort of basis of Franciscan spirituality is that it is both contemplative and active. So it's work and it's prayer. There's also a second order who are full-time contemplatives, and they live an enclosed life. They also work because they support themselves, but they don't go anywhere. Whereas Francis and people who follow Francis typically wander. They don't have monasteries as such. St. Francis founded a third order in response to the request of a village who said, well, we would really like to follow you as well, but we've got homes and families and jobs. So the third order became a way of lay people to take certain promises to have a structured life, but still be in the world. And it was refounded in the 20th century. So like most things, history affected it. And I'm a member of an Anglican third order. So you make lifelong promises, but they're not vows in the same way as the first and second order.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. That's great. And again, in brief, can you say in what ways that area of thinking resonates so powerfully for you with the Alexander Technique? Where are the crossovers?
Well, in some ways, I hadn't realized that they were resonating until I began to think about it. Simplicity is probably at the core of it. So for me, the Alexander Technique is a way of being in the world in a way that's simple. You don't do stuff you don't need to do with every little movement. So there's a simplicity about how we are in the world as practitioners of Alexander work. And the same is true of Francis and of Franciscanism. And one of the promises that you make is to live simply as a Franciscan. So I think that's one of the crossovers. Another very sort of basic one was not taking oneself too seriously. Alexander is quoted as saying, have a twinkle in your eye. And St. Francis' sort of playfulness and refusal to be bound by dogma and seriousness. They both appealed to me, and the Franciscans I knew all seemed to be ridiculously cheerful people.
Yeah.
So that was appealing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that idea of levity, of lightness.
It's not so much, it's not, levity is possibly not the right word, but lightness is, and playfulness as well. So that in Alexander work, for me, you're playing. You're playing. What would happen if I thought X? I happen to think that religion without playfulness becomes zealous, pompous, and frankly, sometimes dangerous. So if you're playful, even with your beliefs, not gripping them, that's my preference, if you like. Yeah.
Okay, I think a lot of what you say there will make it clearer maybe to Alexander people who don't have your sort of religious background, but also I wondered if the prayer, because the prayer is very important, the prayer by St. Francis is very important in structuring the book. I wondered if it might be useful if you could maybe just sort of read that for us, because I think that will also resonate quite powerfully.
And I should say that, as with much stuff about Francis, you can't be sure he actually wrote this. It is attributed to, and that's often the case with saints and sayings. But this one, traditionally, it's addressed Lord, and because I'm a feminist, I do tend to leave out lords wherever possible.
Yeah.
So my version is simply, help me to live this day quietly, easily. Help me to lean on thy great strength, trustfully, restfully. Help me to meet others joyously, peacefully. Help me to wait for the unfolding of thy will patiently, serenely. Help me to look forward to tomorrow confidently, courageously. So that's it.
Great. Yeah.
I have to say, I now adapt it and add other bits. Depending on what I'm doing and what I'm needing, because having got that structure, you can just kind of sort of work with it and again play with it. So yeah.
Right. You just mentioned there about your sort of feminism, and you make clear in the book the importance of the work of St. Francis' colleague, St. Clare. And would you like to say a bit more about her, why you wanted to make that point? And
she, as with much history and indeed theology, has been overlooked. So there's a sort of a reawakening of interest in St. Clare, and she was one of Francis's first followers and founded that contemplative order. So she, only at the age of 23, founded a group of women who were enclosed. They supported themselves by working and what they were given. And she was obviously a seriously strong person, because she came for her entire life under a huge amount of pressure from popes and the establishment to accept money, to accept property. And she was having none of it, because actually that would have given them a control over her, and her deep devotion to poverty. Their view, Francis and Clare's view of Christ, was as someone who let go to profound level, and that was what they tried to emulate. So she lived much longer than Francis, and her writings and her influence are being looked at much more now. And when Francis wanted advice, unusually, he went to her. He was a man who didn't despise taking advice from a woman, even in his own time. Yeah.
Okay. So writing book obviously is not a small commitment. It might be interesting for the Alexander Says Online sort of listenership to have a sense of what motivated, inspired you. Obviously, you had a lockdown project, you had time on your hands and all the rest of it, but what made you want to undertake that? You said you were asked, but there must have been more.
Yeah, initially I was asked, but I have always found it easiest to work out what I think by writing about it. And I'm fortunate in that I find it easy to write and I can type fluently. So it was a way of exploring for myself and a way of working out what I do think. But also I've done workshops on embodying prayer from an Alexander perspective. And sometimes people want something to take away. And I thought this would actually be an opportunity to write something to give people, not that you don't write a book to earn a lot of money. I break even, that will be amazing. I don't actually expect to. But to have something to give people so that they can go back and think about what you've said struck me as being a worthwhile project.
Yeah. Okay, good. And obviously this is, as you know, Alexander Studies Online is sort of very open to all different kinds of inquiry and research, and this is very, very different from a sort of scientific inquiry. So how did you set about the business of converting that sort of personal, disciplined inquiry into what became a publishable output, your written account? What did you have data that you drew on? What kind of data were there? How did you, go about analysing? What process did you follow?
I mean, that's in a way why I use the prayer. So it provided a structure for me, because you think, oh, I'm going to write about my life, about my Alexander work. Oh my goodness, where do you start? And because I had that prayer, which I loved anyway and used, I felt that the key words within it would then allow me to make links to both areas of my experience. And that's effectively what I did. I sort of thought about the different issues, the different things I'd encountered, the beliefs of Franciscanism, the principles of the Alexander technique. And I thought, well, where do they link most naturally? So another person, would probably have made very different links, but they were the links that stood out for me. So I used that really, and I didn't have notes or anything like that from my work. Much of my work is groups. I do teach one-to-one, but the bulk of my experience has been groups. And in some ways, that group in Fallowfield, which I've been working with for 10 years now, has provided just an awful lot of rich experiences. And those were what I was mining. Not written, but yeah, there.
Yeah, kept in your memory, in your head. And yeah. Okay. And how did the sort of writing, because you said about how writing helps you to think. Could you say a little bit about that, how the sort of process of writing helped? Because it sounds to me from what you were saying there as if you had already in your head, almost at the outset, the idea that the prayer was going to be the structure. Is that the case, or did that happen afterward? How did it unfold, the process?
I can't remember. If I'm honest, I can't actually remember. I had the project and I had the prayer. And I think I sort of sat down thinking, oh my goodness, I've said yes to this. How on earth am I going to do this? And probably started playing with the different things I thought I wanted to say. And then, I'm a firm believer in the power of the unconscious. Things emerge. If you open yourself up to creativity and you say, right, I'm going to do X. How do I do that? Things come. I suppose with my priest's hat on, I'd say, oh, well, the Holy Spirit nudged me. She said, do this. But yeah, it came, it was given. And so it emerged. Is the only way I can really say that. Yeah. I didn't do a lot of writing before that structure emerged.
No.
I probably had done quite a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
But not much writing. Yeah.
What about redrafting? Did you find you were doing quite a lot of redrafting to help you to think and pin down your ideas, or did it sort of come out in one,
Yeah, I
fairly
did.
well-formed stream?
I am lucky. I never have to do a lot of redrafting. What I did have to do, and this was a real sort of learning point for me on how insidious the sort of patriarchal lens is, in that I read through, having clearly stated this is about Francis and Claire, and could barely see Claire anywhere. So that was the major piece of rework that I did, was to go back and say, you have missed her voice as well, because we're all sexist. We all internalize a sexist worldview, whether we're female and feminist or not. So that was a humbling experience. And yeah, that was the main bit of redrafting.
That's really interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. As I said, I really like this structure, the way that each chapter is a line of the prayer. I think that works really well. And I also like the fact that you've got, at the end of each chapter, you've got sort of embodied prayer practices, like go for a walk, or, refrain from speaking, those kind of things. Was that something that was always there from the outset for you, or was that something you thought, oh, it'd be nice to have those sort of practical exercises, at the end of each chapter? Was that something?
I think it probably was, because I envisaged right from the word go that this would be quite a practical book. And if I do a workshop, it follows on from that. But if people I never meet them, it gives them things to play with for themselves. So yes, they were there right from the beginning, the idea of that, that it should be something you can play with and use. And I guess for me, that's one of my underlying beliefs, is that religion has become, over the past sort of 300 or 400 years, very much about stuff that you think rather than stuff that you do. And I think we need a rebalancing. I think people need to move away from worrying about whether you believe every semicolon of the Bible or how you believe it, to, okay, so if I want a spiritual practice, what might that look like? And so I'm always wanting to invite people in and to say, well, actually, I think prayer is a universal. I don't think there's a human that doesn't pray at points. What might it feel like if you move away from the stereotype? And how might you explore that for yourself in a way that's empirical? I'm a believer in empirical religion. Try it. Try it and see. So yeah, that was part and parcel of that.
Yeah. Okay. And what were the main challenges you faced in writing up your journey, your inquiry?
Self-doubt. How am I at all qualified to write about either of these topics? Is one. Another challenge I always face, and it's coming up, if you like, because I'm supposed to market this thing, my book, and I'm not very good at that. Two things. One, it feels like self-promotion, and like many of us, I've been brought up in a culture that says we don't do that kind of thing. We don't push ourselves. But the other is it's a very personal book. So you read it and you get really quite a deep sense of who I am. And I am also a very private person. So there's that sense that I'm going to write about this because I think it might be helpful. But at the same time, I'm opening myself up and I'm making myself vulnerable. So there's that vulnerability. And actually, I think any academic work that you do, any work that you take into the public sphere, it can be as couched in academic terms as you like and have as many quantitative graphs in, but you're in there somewhere.
Sure. If
people have, the eyes to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just that self-exposure.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the
Yeah,
powers of the book, really. Yeah, that would be my sense of it. Yeah.
thank you.
And are there any aspects or stages of the process that you particularly enjoyed, or any sort of massive light bulb moments when you thought, aha, that's a real
Um,
there
I think finishing. Although you then have all the sort of the proofreading and the preparation of the manuscript and stuff, which is amazingly detailed. And happily, my husband helped
Oh,
hugely.
that's good.
Um, I loved the process of getting the cover done. That was great fun. I really, really liked the cover.
Okay.
Yes, I was utterly thrilled when I saw it. Yeah, so that was good. Yeah, I
Okay.
suppose those are honestly the most fun bits. Is is getting oh it looks like that.
Okay. And looking back now, is the end product, if you like, similar to what you had in mind? Did you have anything clearly in mind, or how does it differ from what you thought you may end up with? Or
Oh, there's always a fantasy in the head, isn't there, of what this is going to look like and sound like, and it's never that. Um, and I haven't reread it from cover to cover for quite some time, and that's always a worry when you write stuff down because you change and what you think changes. So there's always do I want to reread this in detail because I'm going to see that I've written X? I'm thinking, I'm not sure I agree with X. Yeah. And there is that. It's out there, and that's quite scary. I can't remember what the question was.
well, just how, whether it was very, in any way, very different or similar to what you had in mind,
Yeah,
if you're sort of
I
aiming,
think so. I think it is what I sort of hoped broadly that it would be.
That's
Yes.
good.
Yes.
That's good.
I mean, fundamentally, my hope it was that it would be helpful. And the other, I mean, really lovely thing was the first publisher then decided they couldn't publish it. So I had to look for another one. And in the process of that, I was then at Queen's studying at theological college. And our professor, Nicholas Lee, is a leading feminist theologian and published author of many, many books. And I very, very tentatively and nervously asked her if she'd have a look at it and tell me if she thought it was publishable, and perhaps even help point me towards a publisher. And she wrote the most lovely endorsement for me, and that was a profound relief. And the other person who wrote a lovely endorsement for me, which was possibly even more of a profound relief, was Malcolm Williamson. Because having been trained by Malcolm, and I know he's interested in this because we talked about the project and he recommended books for it and so on. But so you do this, and then you think, what if he thinks it's rubbish? So, and given I respect Malcolm enormously, and was my head of training, his view really mattered. And then one or two other people whose opinions really mattered gave me lovely, lovely endorsements. So that was a really reassuring bit of the process. Yeah. And that helped the fraud syndrome.
Yeah.
It's imposter syndrome, not fraud, isn't it? Imposter.
Yeah, right. I knew what you meant.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think they were my main questions, really. I think you've given us a very good insight into the book, and got us all very interested. So out you said what, in August or something, did you say?
It is. It's available to pre-order now, and I am supposed to encourage everybody to pre-order because apparently that does wonders for sales.
All right.
But yeah, so you can. In fact, one of my young colleagues from Queen's, bless him, was I think the first person to go on and pre-order it, which I was very touched by. So it'll come as a shock when it arrives because he'll have forgotten all about it. But yes, it is, and it's available in different formats, so Kindles and as well as paper copies.
Brilliant! So if you've got details, then I guess we can put that when we put the
the
video up. We can put the details up there. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be really good. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us while you're here? Is there anything you'd like the audience to know about you or about the book? Or
Other than, I regard myself as amazingly fortunate to have both Alexander work and to be a Franciscan trying to follow the way of Christ after the example of Francis and Clare, and I've been recently ordained priest, and so I bring all of that in, and I just regard myself as very, very fortunate to be in receipt of these beautiful, beautiful traditions. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's a lovely note to end on. Thank you very, very much for your time. And it's been fascinating reading what I've read, and really enjoyed it. And I look forward to having more time with the book and hopefully with you at some point.
Thank you, Charlotte. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.